Hello everybody and welcome to our quick little project on how to make a triangular bag. Today we are going to be using the Pfaff Quilt Ambition 630 machine to do this project on. So firstly you'll need to take your two 22 centimetre by 28 centimetre strips and iron the palette onto the back of those. And then you're going to make the markings. So you'll have a centre horizontal marking. You'll also have a centre vertical marking, and then 5 millimeters each side of the centre vertical line, you'll make 2 more lines. Then 1 centimetre either side of centre, you'll place a mark on the bottom line. And then every 2 centimetres thereafter, both left and right, and you'll do that for both side pieces. Once you've done your marking on your fabric, then you'll take a piece of tearaway to place underneath the marked strips to support the buttonhole stitching. Okay, so I'm now going to come to the machine and I'm going to select our standard buttonhole, which is number 33. So I'm just going to touch my stitch menu, scroll down 1 level and select stitch number 33. Once I've done that, I'm now going to get our buttonhole foot, which is this piece here. And I now have to, instead of putting a button in this back section here, okay, I'm actually going to make sure that that little opening between there and there is 10 millimeters. So I've got my little measuring here. So I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to close up that gap until I'm at 10 millimeters. Then I will remove the standard sewing foot from the machine. Then I will attach the buttonhole foot. It's also very important with this model of Pfaff is that to accurately sew the buttonhole is I then have to pull down the little buttonhole sensor lever which sits behind the needle threader. So I would suggest that you test out the buttonhole so you can see that it's the right size before you start putting it onto your project. So once you've tested the buttonhole and it's all okay, then I am going to take my marked piece of fabric with the tearaway behind it, and then I'm going to put the foot down and I'm going to line up my notches where I've marked my 2 centimetre buttonholes, and then I'm just going to push the start stop button. On this machine, the threads automatically get cut, so I just raise the presser foot, just slide the fabric out, and there's your first buttonhole. So you're now going to repeat the process for every one of the little 2 centimetre marks. Also make sure that you keep the buttonholes parallel to the side of the foot so they remain straight. Okay, so once you have completed your strip of buttonholes, you'll repeat the same process for the other strip and then just trim off the excess threads on the top. Now I'm going to select a decorative stitch to sew down either side of the buttonhole stitches. In this case, on my Pfaff Quilt Expression 630, I'm going to choose stitch number 141. I would suggest that you try this out on a test piece of fabric first so you get the placement of the satin stitch so it just touches the satin stitching of your buttonhole. And there you'll have your decorative stitch. So now you'll just repeat that on the other side of this strip and both sides of the second strip. Now that you've completed both sides of your strip, we're going to tear off the excess tearaway, and then we will also cut open the buttonholes so we can then put in the ribbon. So tear off the excess tearaway. Now a little trick to cut open your buttonholes is if you place a pin at the top of the bar tack and then take your seam ripper, being on a flat surface supporting both sides, put the seam ripper in and then push it up towards till it hits the pin. When you do it that way, it's not going to cut through the top of your buttonhole and you won't have to worry about overstepping the mark. So now that we've cut all our buttonholes, we're going to take our piece of 10mm ribbon and we're going to pass it up and we're going to weave it through each of our buttonholes. So just make sure you leave yourself enough ribbon at the end so that it will go into your seam allowance on both ends. So just cut and repeat for the second side. So now you'll have both pieces of your sides threaded with your ribbon. Before we change our decorative thread over to normal sewing thread, we're just going to do the quilting now on the main piece of fabric. So we're going to take our main piece of fabric that has had the pellon ironed onto the back of it, and I'm just going to use my ruler and a pencil, and I'm just going to mark a diagonal line from one corner to the other, and then I'm going to take the one about 5 centimeters out from that. Again, mark a line and 5 centimeters again, diagonally across the fabric. And then I'm going to do a quarter turn on the fabric, mark the center diagonal, and then again. So now you have your fabric all marked up with a cross-hatching grid on it. Okay, so now that we've got our cross-hatched fabric prepared, we're going to put a piece of tearaway behind it to support the stitching. And I'm going to use stitch number 67, which is a wavy decorative stitch, to do our quilting with. So I'm just going to line up the center marking on the foot with my diagonal line, and then I'm just going to sew down the line until all my lines that I've drawn on my fabric are covered with this stitch. Then I'll come back and do the next line to the right. Now we'll just change and start the other diagonal. Okay, so we're now changing our machine back to normal sewing construction thread, top and in the bobbin. And using just a straight stitch, we are just going to put a holding stitch down at the ribbon so that it stays in place while we're putting it all together. So do that for all 4 ends. Okay, so once that's done, we're now going to sew our side pieces to our main pieces of fabric. So right sides together, match up the seams, and then we're just going to use 1.25 centimetre seam allowance and repeat for the other side. So when you open it out, you'll have your 2 pieces on either side. Okay, so now with the right side facing up and you have pressed your seam allowance into the towards the main fabric, take your zip, right sides down. Okay, place the zip over the strip piece of fabric and pin into place. Okay, so once you've got that in place, now you'll take your lining fabric, right side down, and you'll place that and match it up, casing the zip in between the fabric and repin. So you'll have your 3 layers together. Now with my zipper foot on in the left hand position, I'm going to still have the needle in centre needle position, but the edge of my foot is going to press up against the edge of my zipper. So I'm now just going to sew that seam down there. So now we have our zipper and our lining all in place there. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it to the iron and I'm going to fold that back and iron it, and then I'm going to top stitch along there to hold it down in place so it doesn't roll back. Now that you've pressed your seams back, we're going to top stitch down the folded edge. I'm still going to use my zipper foot. However, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to move my needle position slightly to the left, so I am just catching the folded edge of the fabric, and I'll use the left side of the presser foot as my guide. So now we'll just top stitch down. So now we have just top stitched down to stop the edges rolling back towards the zip. Okay, now we're going to put the zip in the other side. So first of all, I'm going to make sure that my lining is even with the edges of my front piece. If they're not, just trim up. So now we're going to turn it over and open it out so it's all open. And I'm going to put the right side of the front fabric against the right side of the zip, and then I'm going to bring the lining piece and place it behind the fabric. I'm going to line up all the edges and pin in place. So now when I come to sew it, I'll just sew down there again using the side of the zipper foot against the side of the zipper teeth. Just make sure before you start stitching that all your side seams are matching up. Okay, also remember to put your needle position back into 0 for your zipper foot, and then we are just going to sew down the side of the zip with the zipper teeth. Okay, so what you'll do now is undo the zip all the way, fold it back on itself, and then you're going to press that seam open, and then you'll top stitch again as we did before. Now when you come to sew down and top stitch the second side, you will have to make sure that your zip is open so you've got room to move. So now we've done the zipper up, this will tell us what is going to be the top of our bag and what's going to be the bottom. So this is going to be the top of my bag where the zipper pull is, and this makes this the bottom of the bag. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to turn it inside out, and then I'm going to fold it flat with the bottom zipper in the middle of the bag. So then when I've got my bottom zipper in place, I will pin that, and then we're going to do a seam across here. Okay, so now that I've got it all pinned in place, I've taken my zipper foot off and gone back to my normal sewing foot, and I have also put the needle back into centre needle position. I'm now going to take 1.25 centimetre seam allowance, and I'm going to sew across the bottom of the bag. Just make sure that your seams that you've ironed down are sitting flat. Okay, so now that you've sewn your bottom seam, It'll be much easier if you now trim off the excess fabric. So I'm going to allow about a centimetre from my stitching line, and I'm just going to trim off the excess, including the zipper. Okay. Now we're going to do the top one. So we're going to open the zipper up, and then you're going to fold the zipper teeth facing one another, and again level out the bag in the opposite direction. So your zipper teeth will now be joined on the side. So we'll just pin that in place. So again, it's important here that where your two strip seams are is that you line those both up as well so they match. Okay, so once you've got all that in, we're actually going to start sewing from the top of the zip, but there's a little technique we need to show you first. All right, if we start to sew our seam right from where the zipper teeth are, our zipper teeth will push one over the other and they won't be even. So what I'm going to do is at 1.25 centimetres, I'm going to start sewing so the foot is not on the zipper teeth. So then I will start to sew forward. Then I'm going to go into reverse, and then I'm going to reverse over the zipper teeth. Okay, and then I can come forward, keeping my 1.25 centimetre seam allowance. So now we're going to trim up the zip, trim up to a 1 centimetre, and then we're going to come back and do an overcasting stitch to cover the raw edges. So now on my Pfaff Quilt Ambition 630, I'm now going to choose an overcasting stitch. So I'm going to go and select stitch number 20, and I'm now going to put on my blind hem or overcasting foot. Now on this particular foot, it has a little guide under here, which I'm going to allow the needle to come across onto the right hand side of that, so it stops the overcast edge being pulled up and puckering the fabric. So we'll just change that. So now what I'm going to do is put the raw edge of my fabric against the little red marker here. And then we'll just sew down the side. Now as I come up to the zipper teeth, I'm not going to sew over the zipper teeth with the overcasting stitch. I'm just going to stop before it, do a couple of reverse stitches, and then cut the thread. So now that gives you a nicely sealed edge without any fraying or puckering there. So now we're just going to turn it around and repeat the same process for the second edge. And there's the second side done. So now I'll just trim up the excess threads. And simply now we just turn the bag inside back out. So we just turn the bag right way out. Push out the corners. And now you have your lovely little triangular pouch all ready, finished. Congratulations, well done.